You are familiar with Ken Badley, but I would like to remind you that Ken, who is the author of a new book on curriculum planning, which he calls an extended call to design curriculum and instruction with the same principles used by architects and city planners. We should be seeing some maps and plans today, which kind of is exciting to me. He will make a presentation and then allow for conversation. Many of you know that Ken is a longtime member of ICCTE and has made many friends in the organization over the years. He's currently teaching at Mount Royal University in Calgary, and he's a great colleague and I must say a wonderful teacher, and I'm really glad that he's joined us here today. So welcome, Ken. I'm turning the mic over to you.
All right. Well, if we think of the hour as having two parts, I would like to take about 15 minutes or so at the beginning and just show this deck of slides. It's not text heavy, so don't get worried. And then just have conversation for the last part of the hour. So that was my plan. I'm not technically that proficient, so Scott's going to have to kind of hold my hand so we can get this PowerPoint deck onto the screen. And then he will record your questions during that time, because I'm not sure I'm capable of stopping the presentation and going into this other mode. So I'm sorry for having it that way, broken apart like that. But in 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have conversation if that's workable for people. So let me, you're going to hear Scott coaching me along here. So I'm going to try the share button and go to my PowerPoint.
Okay, and your screen is now appearing.
Okay, and I could go to full screen, I think.
Right.
Did that work?
You're seeing the edit view, and remember, folks, you can hide the heads if you want.
So this, it's the only biographical slide really here, that I read this Wired magazine article, one-page article in 2004 about an architect I'd never heard of named Christopher Alexander. He taught at Berkeley for decades. And I read this one page and thought this ought to apply to curriculum design, not just to buildings. So I make this distinction between what teachers mostly do, which is the bottom left-hand slide here. I think they mostly are building, they're mostly working. And sometimes on a late Sunday night, they're planning, but they rarely have time for design. And so my argument is that if we could start with design and then do unit planning and then do day-to-day planning and instruction, I think our lives would be more sane. So just a tech question here. Are you seeing a full screen of this now, Scott, or just the edit screen?
Well, we're seeing the edit screen, and if you want to try one more time to put it in the view mode, that would be great.
Okay, I'll
load
try
up the last time.
Yeah, I tried to show the slideshow in a that is not, no, that is not going to work. So we'll just stick an edit screen, and you'll know there's a human being on this end that way. So I'm going to try one more time. Nope. So the next...
Ken, go down to the bottom of your, at the very bottom over on your right, and there's a little icon that looks like a, yeah, click on that. Seeing it, I'm just seeing your screen spinning and spinning, which means for whatever reason you're, oh, there we go. Now we're seeing the speaker view.
And is this a little less cluttered?
It is, but now we're going to see all your secrets about your notes and everything.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. You
okay. Oh, and I'm going to go. Yeah. Okay, that's working. So here's my question. There's supposed to be a joke here, folks. Badley's hierarchy of needs, because I think most teachers spend most of their time on daily preparation and instruction. And as I say, when they face a 2-week or a 6-week or an 8-week unit, they do some planning. I don't think they usually manage to plan the whole thing. And what I'm asking is, could we start with design? And my concern, of course, in teachers' weeks, and the research says the shortest teacher week in the world is actually Slovakia, about 39 hours. And the Canadian teachers is about 55 hours, 56 hours a week. And they don't have a lot of time, or they don't make a lot of time for design. And in my view, at least, that reduces professionalism and reduces their sense of craft. So that's the end of my argument. Now I'll show you what the book says. So 10 principles in the book, all from this architect, Christopher Alexander. And the first principle is centers, which is very similar to McTeague and Wiggins' language. I recognize that. I'm thinking of a unit on space here. The second half of the text says, could we build toward the visit of these two astronomers that are going to come to our class? And then for several days afterwards, we process what they brought us. And that would act as the center of the unit in the same way that the map of Paris is so recognizable, because the center, the Arc of Triumph, is so, it's iconic. And so there's my, or Alexander's argument about center. So this is my next door neighbor's deck. No center, little patch of snow at a barbecue. And the next chapter in the book is actually about boundaries. My neighbor's deck has no boundaries either. And the code in Calgary is 18 inches off the ground. There's supposed to be a railing, and he has no railing. So I feel like sometimes units are like my neighbor's deck. Like there's no center, there's no edge. We come to school every day and she does some stuff. And then at the bottom, just a snotty comment, because there's been so many Facebook posts about snow and I'm tired of them. Yes, it snows here, but we don't have to put pictures on Facebook. So boundaries is a central concept for Christopher Alexander, and I think students need to know where a unit ends and where it starts. And we do that, of course, with outlines, we do it with activities, we do it with assignments, we answer questions, we make clear what is in this unit and what is not in the unit. And I had to put this picture in of this farmer in Saskatchewan who built a wall. It took him 30 years, and he built this wall, and he said everybody should do something useless in their life. And so he built this, this wall. I'll show you my wall later. Central concept for Christopher Alexander is entrances and exits. And so I wrote here that students should clearly know that a new unit has started and when it will end and when it has ended. And of course, you think about, many of you have been in the National Gallery in London, and you know you've entered a special place. And I thought, I served on a committee in Saskatchewan for 3 years, Outstanding Teacher Award program that the Minister of Education runs. And one of the nominations, there's a France unit in grade 6 in Alberta. And this woman put the seats in the classroom like a jumbo jet. And she wore an Air France light blue outfit, and she talked French. And I thought that day, every student knew they had started the France unit. And I think we need grand entrances to our units, and we need to teach our student teachers that you need to start with something big on the first day of a unit, so students go home that night thinking, this is going to be just great. Well, another central concept for Alexander is coherence and connection. My daughter, who's a designer, did this terrible poster of a nightclub to say, here's a complete lack of coherence. There's text all over the page, and it's a mess. So my comment was, this discordant club poster contains information, but the parts don't connect to the whole. So it is a visual mess. I even tried to find the ugliest font I could to put the text in it, but I couldn't really find an ugly one. Did my best. So do students experience some units this way, the way I experienced this poster? That's my question. So here's a street. Carla Nelson doesn't have audio right now, but she used to live in this city as well and knows this street. A historic street in an old section of Edmonton, and the buildings they were built over several different decades in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They all connect to the street, and I think a unit should be like that. And my book partly arose out of a question a student asked me one time, which was, what is World War II doing in this course? And I thought, well, somebody didn't explain things very well if this student doesn't know why World War II is in a course on 20th century history. And so that was my own failure there, was one of the reasons I got going on this project. So again, an iconic park, all of us recognize this, and green spaces. Cities need them, teachers need them, students need them. So for students, of course, it's a visit to the library, commonly called the Learning Commons now. It's video, it's a classroom guest, it's a classroom cleanup day, it's the work period. And of course, we need them too. We can't just push the freight train every day. So here's the next 5-6 weeks of instruction. And a lot of Alberta students have a holiday. Well, all Alberta students have a holiday this coming Monday. And then on the 7th and 8th of March, a lot of students are going to have 2 days off because of a teacher's convention. But let's imagine this is a 5th grade class or a 4th grade class. There's a lot of work days there. And my suggestion is, as I did on 27 February and again on the 21st of March, is why not plan something that's different? Plan something like that day, a trip to the Learning Commons, or a test in the classroom. So that's my argument about green spaces right there. So another concept in architecture is that everybody should have access to public space and everyone should have a private place. So the reading nook, the bedroom, obviously, the backyard, these are all private spaces. And the colonnade, in a sense, offers both. You feel safe and private, and yet you can see out into the public space. So my argument is that every unit should include work that all students will complete, but it should include choices among some work so that all students can build a unique route through a material. Oh, sorry, to the Americans, a unique route through the material. So I'm teaching a philosophy of ed course this semester. I have 31 students, and literally no 2 of them are working on the same grading scheme. So they have wide choice, and I have a very simple grade tracking system. Now this is a screenshot, and I'm sorry you can't read it because it's too small, but the 5 boxes at the bottom are 5 different tracks. And now at the top of the page, we all did common work on Parker Palmer's Courage to Teach. But the second half of the course from the break on is every student picked his or her own route through the course. And so no 2 students in the room have the same philosophy of ed course from me this semester. I have that as a Word doc. If anyone wants to see it, I'm happy to get it to you later. Another concept in architecture and city planning, there needs to be repetition, but there needs to be variety and contrast. And so in my argument, in my view, repetition gives security to students. And if there are some structures that are always there, they feel secure in class. But there has to be variety, especially in teaching learning strategies and in how the instructional time is divided up. Well, I'm telling most of you what you already know, and so I apologize for that. I don't mean to be patronizing. Old white male tells me things I knew, right? So this is a neighborhood I grew up in Regina, Saskatchewan. Don't try to say Saskatchewan. And it's interesting, I had a different paper route on every one of those streets at some point between age 9 and age 15. And there's a great predictability. In fact, I even tried delivering the papers blind one time, and I actually bumped into a fence. But that's the kind of security you can get from a grid or from that kind of repetition. But I wonder if sometimes students feel dead, like this apartment block in Hong Kong, when it's the same every day. So in my philosophy of ed courses this semester, there are repeated structures. There's always a forecast sheet. This is what I think we're going to do today. I have it on the tables where they sit before they get there. There's always hot drinks available when they get there. We always start with either a circle meeting or a short video or music, or we read the book Ish. Carla can't respond right now, but she got me onto this children's book, and the question we ask afterwards is, how teacherish do you feel today? Given that you just got back from a major internship, or you're stuck in class, or whatever it is. And so thank you, Carla, for that tip. But the last 2 in yellow, I'll talk more about them in a sec. But in every class, I show a clip from a teacher film or 2. Sometimes these are led by a student, sometimes they're led by me. And in every class, we have 1 or 2 other main content areas, either from the text, or we're looking at something in the Schools Act, or we're looking at a case study that a student did. So there are constants, but there's variety. And so from the last line on that other slide, I said in 1 or 2 other main content areas, either from the text or School Act, etc. But in that very predictable segment of every class, I use a variety of teaching learning strategies every day for several reasons. I'm pretty sure they don't learn much from old white men like me, hold forth. They are students, and I don't want them getting bored. And I don't want to get bored. And they are education students, and they need to see a variety of teaching learning strategies demonstrated. So my goal every semester is to try to use 20 or 25 different strategies And some of them, of course, are more appropriate for elementary school, but they'll give you a pass because it's an ed class. So here's some blackout poetry we just did on Parker Palmer's book, Courage to Teach. They told me what page they wanted photocopied, and they spent about 45 minutes. Seriously, Csikszentmihalyi would have been thrilled. The room was absolutely quiet as they worked on these. And it was my first shot at blackout poetry. If you haven't tried it, look it up on the web. One of my students said she had used it right down in kindergarten. Wow. So with 5 different words, but blackout poetry, what a different way to approach a text like Courage to Teach. So back to variety and repetition. Here's a city in Germany, it's Cologne, and great similarity between the buildings, but great variety. And I think our units should be like that. So here's 2 buildings showing another principle, gradients and harmony and scale. And the building on the left was just completed about 2 years ago in Calgary, a beautiful condo in Art Deco style. And then the building on the right, which again, those who have lived in Toronto know this building, a gorgeous office building, about 60 or 70 years old. But it doesn't intimidate you, unlike many modern buildings, which are 60 or 70 stories high and run right down to the sidewalk. And my fear is that when a student, say 10 or 12 years old, faces a new unit, sometimes we raise the temperature so much, I think it intimidates them. And these 2 buildings are accessible from the street, and that's what I think units should be like. On the first day, the student should feel invited, not terrified. So one of Alexander's central principles is that we don't make things perfect, we don't master plan, we kind of go along and we figure it out as we go. And he uses the word patina quite a bit, the way bronze or brass railings look after 50 or 60 years in a museum or in a bank building. And in his view, that shows that we've been listening to students, it shows that humans have been here. So I always tell students what other students suggested what we're doing today. And I regularly send a syllabus out to last year's students to say, you know, I'm doing this course again. Any ideas how we could have done this differently? And I tell my new students, this came from so-and-so last year. And it's a way to say, this course is growing organically. You people have input into it, and I'm just trying to figure it out as I go. The last principle here is that we need agile, light structures. And now this bridge designer, everybody in the world needs one by him, and Calgary paid $20 million to get a little pedestrian bridge done by him. But my argument is simple, elegant structures enhance students' understanding, and they actually simplify our day-to-day planning. So my 3 steps back to Badley's hierarchy of deeds: design first, plan second, build third. So another bridge that I've loved for years and have not seen, but in Switzerland, it's simple, it's elegant, it's strong, and in fact, it's revolutionary because it was the first concrete bridge to use reinforcing steel in the 1930s. So I'm working on a research project this semester with 12 in-service and pre-service teachers, asking, can we teach teachers to design units that are simple and elegant? And the Canadian Association of Teacher Ed is actually holding an October conference this year related to this question. And so these students and I will be proposing, I think will be accepted, we'll be proposing our paper that in fact teachers can learn how to be designers. So here's my younger daughter did the cover for my book. Here's 2 covers she did that the publisher didn't like. And the one, of course, has that bridge in Switzerland on it. And so here's the cover that the publisher did go with. And seriously, if you think you might adopt it, please see the examination request form at the Routledge website. And even if you don't, please consider a stocking stuffer for next Christmas. Because all my royalties last year led to 1 trip for a coffee, and I'd like to beat that this year if I could. So, but last comment, I know this is ICCTE, not Calvin, but if this approach, this kind of architectural or design approach interests you, then check out this conference at Calvin this October. And the theme at the bottom of the screen there, what happens when we think about Christian learning as something shaped by our designs for learning? So some of you know the work of David Smith, and he's the organizer of this conference. And I'm not trying to get you there because I'm the speaker, but I will be one of the speakers on this thing. And I'll just give this same deck of slides, so you might have just saved yourself $600 or $700. So with Scott's help, I'm going to try to end this now and stop the share, go back to
Okay, you did successfully stop the share.
Okay, and now we can talk.
That's right. So, folks, questions or comments, and if you'd like to speak, just go ahead. If you'd like to type in to the text chat on the right-hand side of the screen, I can monitor that as well.
I just saw pictures of some people I didn't know were here. Glad to see you.
Yeah. I will start, Ken.
Okay.
I was really taken by the phrase you used towards the end of your presentation. This course is growing organically,
Mm-hmm.
and the notion that you send out a syllabus to previous students and say, "Hey, I'm teaching this again. Give me some suggestions. You know, what would you do differently?" And so forth. Talk a little bit more about that. Maybe even a specific example. I'm kind of curious if your past students will actually give you some input to help you grow the course organically.
Yeah. I used Parker Palmer a year ago as well. It's in our university, it's mostly third-year students who are in it and a few fourth-year students. And a number of students, of course, found it a profound book, and others, as you know, you're all profs. Some didn't read it, I'm sure. But I wrote to that whole class, and I got back about 9 suggestions from 6 different students. I included all 9 in this year's syllabus and said, here's some things that came in from last year's people. And I had their names, the students' names who suggested them. And a number, I noticed, those assignments just came in yesterday, actually. I noticed a number adopted these assignments that were suggested by last year's students. And so basically in the email I said, you guys, we had a good time with Parker Palmer, but I need more ideas here. What do you have? You're all teachers, help me out. And they did.
Wow.
So, yeah. And again, some of you know the University of Oregon campus. Now, the architect I love was a major consultant for them. And his argument was, we have these constraints, railway tracks, et cetera, near the campus. How do we build this campus over years and years rather than making a perfect master plan at the start? And so those of you that have been on that campus, he was involved there. And his argument is organic growth is, you know, the reason we love these old towns in Italy and France and so on is that they grew organically. And, you know, the 3 master plan cities of the world, Philadelphia, Paris, and Brasilia, well, one of them is a masterpiece. One of them's a disaster. And I'll let you folks decide about Philadelphia. I've never been there. But those were the 3 cities that were most famously master planned from scratch. And of course, Paris was burnt in the 1700s and had to be rebuilt. But Brasilia is a disaster, apparently. I've not been there. And I think of, you know, only God makes things perfectly. So why don't we just let these courses grow as we go?
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Karen. Can you talk a little bit more about the personalization of the course with students? I think you were using that example of the course where you started with Parker Palmer and then you allowed for some, different routes through the course.
Okay, yeah, the one shot I said I can send you later, but I'll tell you the 5 boxes contain this. First of all, the first 40% of the course, 50, sorry, was determined. And we just finished that yesterday. The break in Alberta is next week, the university break. And so we've had 6 weeks now, and we have 7 to go after the break. So 40% of the work was on Parker Palmer, and 10% was a small assignment based on a book that some of you may know, William Westney, The Perfect Wrong Note. But the last half of the course, there were 5 tracks. One of them was called exams. I think you all understand what that word means. The second one was called book project, and 8 of them signed up to say, we're going to try to get a book about internships or placements, school placements, on Amazon by April 9th, written by 8 students. And it will not be published in the, what do you call it, the prestigious sense. It's just going to be mounted on Amazon. And we hope that people heading into their school placements will buy it for $2. And there's a 3rd track is called the major paper. And the 4th track is called the minor paper, plus some small assignments. And the 5th track is called small assignments. And so there's 5 ways through the course, through the second half of the course. Yeah. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, Karen, in your question.
So these are routes that you have predetermined. You're just giving lots of different routes to kind of get to the end.
Yes, and in fact, I should say more. Within each of them, there's all kinds of choice as well. Well, within some of them, for example, the last one, a bunch of little assignments. There's a whole a set of readings. You can choose from those. There's a set of workshops, of course, given by the university. I'm not sure what it's called, the Student Support Center. I think most places have those. Writing workshops and reading workshops, you could take those. I've had my own set of planning design workshops this semester. You could take those. And so there's actually probably several, maybe tens of thousands of ways to combine the components of this course into what students wanted to do. Yeah. Now, Scott, you're actually the only one I can hear, and so.
Yeah, most of our colleagues have muted themselves.
Oh, okay.
But I suppose if they want to talk, they will.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, like Rob, did you want to make a comment? Looks like you might. Not necessarily.
Can you hear me now? We
can, yes.
Excellent. I apologize for arriving late. I was with a student teacher who's having some struggles. So I did catch the reference to boredom, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what you would suggest in terms of either architectural images or shifts out of boredom when students or student teachers prefer boredom to elegance and excitement because it's more comfortable to stay there, just as if you only know row houses or tall apartment blocks, you don't really venture out too far from there.
Wow. Thanks for the tough question, Rob. Hashtag, it's too early. I guess I would answer, I think of a simple example. There's always coffee and tea and hot chocolate in my room. And I bought a kettle at the Goodwill for $4, so we can always have boiling water. And it's interesting, the first day of a semester, students are very hesitant to accept coffee or tea or hot chocolate from a professor. Mm-hmm. And so I keep bringing it. And of course, then you get a reputation. It's not a big department. We take in 100 students a year. And the reputation I have now is, his class, there's always refreshments. And so I persisted, I guess. And regarding, say, teaching learning strategies, I just persist. And the first time, for example, the students know that I use video clips in every class, actually. I own about 55 teacher films, and I use 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and we discuss what was going on here. And the first time, students are very hesitant to talk about a video clip, especially if the film's in translation. I have, Indian films, Slovakian films, and so on. And they're very hesitant because they've only seen Freedom Writers and Bad Teacher with, I can't remember her name. And suddenly they're looking at documentaries that they've never heard of before. Many of you know To Be and To Have, the French Etre Noir, the French film. And the first time they see some of these films, they're just not sure what to do. And we're talking about things they haven't talked about before. It's not just the teacher's sex life, which might be what they talk about when they party and watch a film like Bad Teacher. But now we're talking about the source of authority, or how's the teacher present, or how did the teacher manage that situation. So I just persist. I don't know if that's the right answer, Rob, but I've never heard this question before, so you kind of caught me off guard. Thanks for nothing.
Welcome.
All right. Well, we got.
But Michelle had a question typed there a moment ago.
Yeah. How are you tackling wrestling with the 10 principles with state education standards and expectations that often tie our hands?
Yeah, and of course I'm in the university, so I have the luxury of doing whatever I want. But in the fall semester, I had a class where there were 3 sections and the curriculum was supposed to be the same. This is the first year they're in education. It's a common course, and frankly, I didn't do well, Michelle. I don't play well with others, as it turns out. And I chafed under this common syllabus the whole semester long, and finally asked my students after the fall break, I said, can we change part of this course? I said, you're going to get in trouble next semester, or I am, because it's a full year course and I was only doing the first half. As for K-12 teachers, I think it's, for example, if a jurisdiction says, these are the 5 units in grade 7 science, this is not in conflict at all with what a teacher does. And as you know, McTeague and Wiggins have pretty much an iron grip on every education program in the country. And this is certainly, I had to argue this in the book, this is not in conflict with the idea that, sorry, I shouldn't use the word idea, with the approach that says, what's the big idea? And how do you assess for that? And then how do you teach, et cetera, the routine. And I'm arguing this is not in conflict at all with the way McTeagan. I think they're probably used in 90% of ed programs. That idea, and rightly so, as opposed to an old white man like me who just shows a PowerPoint deck and thinks he's taught. And as you know, many of those PowerPoint decks came from the textbook publisher, and you hear about them from your students. You hear about the other profs who do that, and so I have the luxury of being in higher ed, but I know some states and some smaller jurisdictions, districts have their own planning model, their own template, etc. And I can't answer that.
Well, let me comment that I think one of the clues that I would put out in response to that is what you said about the planning of the University of Oregon campus. There are constraints like railroad tracks. Those tracks are not going to move.
Right.
I think one of the things you're arguing is if we spend more time initially with the design process, we're going to be able to adapt what we want to do to fit within those constraints instead of always being behind the curve. I mean, that's the way I'm imagining trying to help pre-service people get a grasp of, yes, you've got to live with those constraints, but you can still do this. Let's see, a couple more questions. Ken, Carla wants to know if your focus on curriculum design connects to rich theological foundations and will help teacher candidates articulate how it is that they teach Christianly. Could you comment on that?
I can. My sort of first round of trying to think about this in preparation for this plenary talk at Calvin in October has been more focused on something like whatever your hand finds to do it as unto the Lord. There's a kind of a theme like that runs through Scripture that I've worked on. But one of Alexander's principles, and I have to thank my wife here, who's the theologian, is the reality of sin means we're not going to have perfect classes, and we're not going to make perfect plans. And maybe this is one way just to make the world a little bit better for our students in a fallen world where things go wrong, and we're, in Parker Palmer's language, where we have some real flops in our teaching. And maybe this is a way just to sort of make that a little bit better. And so I'm wishy-washy today, but I'll have it all clarified by October.
Well, we're giving you some good preparation for your gig in October.
Yeah. Well, and the biblical theme of... Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to ask you to look at Lori's question or comment there about David. Curious to know if and how David Smith and Susan Felch's teaching on Christian imagination influenced your exploration of this metaphor, if at all.
Wow. Do I have to say the answer out loud? I read the book when it came out, but it didn't influence it. Yeah, I was shaped almost entirely by I read about 125 architecture books and everything that Christopher Alexander wrote, books and articles, and really that's where it came from. Yeah.
Lori, do you see a connection?
I'll go ahead and unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Respond.
Yeah, I definitely see the connection simply because building was one metaphor that they explored extensively. Mm-hmm. So and from a Christian perspective, so I was just curious because Ken and I tend to read the same books. I was just curious to see if, and that may connect with the question about articulating it from a Christian perspective as well. So I just put that out there for whoever might want to find those connections as well. Yeah,
and it really is an area that I'm serious about needing to work on because I anticipate this question in October when I speak there, and that is, so where's the theological background? I'm going to be with Christian Reformed people in October, right? And sorry, that was a bit of a dig, and if anybody Reformed is listening, forgive me for that. But we'll still be in the center circle in heaven. But in my anticipation of this presentation, I think I do need to be able to say, what am I looking at in Scripture that says we should do this, right? Well, fallenness is a theme, as is look for beauty, service to others, etc. And if we, for example, if a student understands better why World War II is in my course, I've served that student. And I actually not failed in the sense of gave him an F. I failed that student 15 years ago and I couldn't explain. Why can't you two guides in the course, you dummy? Well, actually, no, it was me that was at fault. And I didn't.
So friend to friend, you should probably reread that section before you go.
Okay, thanks. Sure.
So Lori had a follow-up, but between her follow-up, Tom poses a question to you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can glance over at that. Essentially what he's asking is, are there any ideas for helping new teachers to develop skills of clarity? Citing some of the references to clarity that you made in the presentation.
Yeah, Tom, I'm not being blithe about this, but the teachers I'm working at this semester run from a student in her first year of education to a teacher in his second year in the profession. And so there's 12 of us have been meeting. We've met 4 times already, and we're going to meet 5 more times. And our paper will be on whether teachers can learn to be designers. And so I'm not trying to put you off, but I hope to have the answer to that by June. And the way this particular association works, the Canadian Association of Teacher Ed, is we're going to have a working conference in October, and then in June 2020 we'll have a conference where this will become a book chapter. And I hope by then that these 12 will say, yeah, I think you can learn to do this. Things can be more clear, or we can learn to be designers. So I don't know if that's related to your question about clarity, but the students I've worked with, some of them I worked with last year in a series of workshops as well, and they insist that they plan better because they design first.
You want to follow up, Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that I've come to believe is that a key aspect of quality teaching is the ability to be clear. And so I think there's value in what you're doing if it helps new teachers learn how to be more clear. And it certainly is something that various people come with different levels of skill. And so we need the ability to help people who are starting at a lower level of clarity to be able to raise that if they're going to be successful in the classroom. So I appreciate the work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And that's actually why I don't criticize McTeague and Wiggins, though I criticize how they managed to turn one idea into 9 books. But I don't criticize them for the idea itself, which I do think so many teachers actually don't know what they're going to be aiming at after lunch this afternoon. And I think McTeague and Wiggins have done us all a service by saying, well, what is it you're aiming at today? What are they supposed to know by 2 o'clock? And in that sense, that kind of clarity they've been arguing for since 1990. So I think I'm maybe coming at a similar question from a different angle.
A question from Rob.
Hang on just a second, Rob. Let me get Lori's additional thought here. She's wondering how accessible this book is for professors in other academic disciplines.
Completely.
Okay.
My worry, as I wrote, was that professors would be offended that many of my examples are from K-12.
Okay.
Right.
The university I'm at, I'm speaking at a retreat on the 29th of April, so right after graduation weekend, and it'll be all professors. So that'll be the test, I guess, for your question. Do they think this is nonsense? And because, again, as you know, and I'm not against planning a course, I'll use the word epistemologically, but many professors would say our developmental psych text, for example, has 14 chapters. The semester has 13 weeks. We're going to work through the textbook. And that's what I would call an epistemological organization of the semester. Meanwhile, in the province where I live, one of my students yesterday said, I will be in Banff. Those of you that don't know that word, that's a major ski resort, 90 minutes from my house. One of them said, I'll be in Banff by tonight. So her semester is not planned around the structure of the textbook. Her semester is planned around her week in Banff.
That's right.
She's skiing right now as we're talking. And so I'm thinking, how does this professor with a 14-chapter textbook plan for my student's state of mind the days before her trip to Banff and the days right after spring break? He's not planning that at all. And this weekend, some of your students flew. With this coming weekend, some of your students will fly to another city for a wedding. We do not take that into account when we plan. And as you know, many of you, there are so many assignments and exams loaded into the 3 or 4 days after break. Sometimes I wonder, what are we thinking? We should put it the second week after break and we'll get their attention. And so those are the kinds of real life, as my daughters call it, IRL, in real life, planning IRL. Those are the kinds of considerations I think faculty members especially don't take into account. The book has 14 chapters. Let's start. Open to page 1. This is that scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know, and the next concept is the Laffer curve. Bueller, you all know the scene I'm talking about. Bueller, and I think so many students experience our courses that way. Sorry, I'm yelling here.
That's okay. I think you you're kind of setting yourself up to have to report back to this group after a couple of months here, after you've digested some of these questions and comments.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to ask for a report on how that goes with the general faculty, because
Yeah.
I have a faculty development role now, and I find a little bit of resistance to the education prof telling them how it's supposed to go, as well as the examples drawn from K through 12. So, and I don't think my university is unique in that way. So
Right. No, you're right.
I'm just curious to know how that goes. I also think that using a metaphor like that could be a very powerful inroad as well. So I'm just curious to know how it goes.
Yeah, and as you know, well, all of us in this conversation, some metaphors work for some people, not for others. Right. And
Right.
A social work prof, friend of mine from the University of Calgary, bought it, and she said it's a bit metaphorical for some, but she loved it. And so, there will be some take to it, and others, I think, will think we're off in metaphor land here, also known as Kentopia.
Kentopia, yeah. Hey, Rob, do you have a question, comment?
Yes, just following up from Carla's question. I was just wondering, Ken, if you'd thought about another biblical architectural reference by way of God's design for the temple and the glory of the temple, and how that relates to space, gates, openness, encounter, presence, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and actually one of the people I do plan to include, relatively unknown character, Exodus 31, named Bezalel, who was given all these gifts of actually woodwork and bronze work and sewing and so on, specifically gifted for the construction of the ornaments in the tabernacle. And I want to say that these ordinary things, these ordinary parts of life, such as instructional design, are, if we're going to honor God in the way we do instructional design, then we should think about a person like Bezalel. So yeah, that's in my plan, but not written.
Right. Thank you.
And different times in making the book, I thought, should I aim for the small audience, 80% of whom are in this chat room, or should I write a book for the general audience? And I wrote for a general audience, and I tried to make it a thoroughly Christian without naming the sponsor.
I get it.
So, folks, we're getting close to the end of our time. We may have time for one more question or comment, and then I'll turn it over to Ken to wrap up if he has anything that he wants to wrap. This has been good, Ken.
Well, and I want to say one more thing. I forgot to show at the time. One of the slides had as a background. Just want to try to share it again. I want to make a comment about one of the slides. Yeah, if we can find it.
Yeah, find it first and then share it.
Okay.
And we don't have to see you.
My desktop. Here we are. This, can you see that slide?
Of the snowy street?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, this is actually a wall I built next to my driveway because my neighbor is an immigrant. And I built his wall a couple of years ago out of snow, and I tried to get him to pay for it, but he wouldn't. And so this was in honor of a certain politician, some of you may know. And the only real result of the wall was that my wife said, now we're going to hit school kids with our car because we can't see them coming down the sidewalk. So that was my personal lesson about walls and the dangers of walls. So I wanted to say that I probably offended about 4 of you just now, but the other 5 are laughing. So that's a trade-off I'm willing to make.
There's always unintended consequences, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share. So I see the Buchanan smiling and Michelle, so thank you. Oh yeah, you're from the West Coast.
Yeah.
I have no brilliant conclusions, Scott. It's very much a tentative thing here. We're seeing how it goes, and I haven't seen a statement from the publisher yet to know if the copy my wife bought is the only one sold so far, or how that's going. But anyway, I'm waiting to see. I think June 30th I'll see my first royalty statement. But for those of you that have book projects in mind, I was turned down by Sage, and by Oxford, and by Josie Bass. And I thought, I'm not going to cave yet, folks. And I sent it to Routledge, and they said yes. and it took 4 years to get an acceptance. But so don't give up on those projects that with the first, sorry, we have other priorities. First time you get that email, don't give up.
Thank you for the encouragement, Ken, and then for a good interactive session today.
Yeah, and I should say, if you look over my shoulder, you see a school bus. And I can't jump up right now to show you, but the lights work on it. It's a working school bus. And that reminds me of why I'm in my office every day. And can I do one more thing? It's going to require turning my computer.
Okay.
Okay, it'll just take a minute. Can you see a bunch of pictures on my wall?
Yes.
Okay, so up at the top is Peter Berger, the sociologist. I owe him big time. There's Christopher Alexander over there on the side. I think you can see the Beatles. B.B. King, C.S. Lewis. There's a picture from a Flannery O'Connor story. There's Bach, Dostoevsky, Shakespeare, Joseph Conrad, Wittgenstein, Dorothy Sayers, Mother Teresa, Tolkien.
Yeah.
The days I don't feel like working, I look up at them and I ask, wonder what they did when they didn't feel like working. We encourage you all with that.
Thank you.
I'm guessing that all of us have more work to do today.
Yeah, well, we all have big debts to the people on whose shoulders we walk too. So anyway, there's my guilt-inducing wall. So.
Well, somehow I don't think it's guilt. I think it's admiration and inspiration.
Yeah, well, thank you for this and for your questions. I'm going to be thinking for the rest of the day. And if any of you want any of this stuff I mentioned, please just email me. And is there a way for me to get my email to everybody, Scott?
You can type it into the text chat, or I can send it out when we send out the notice for where the recording can be found.
Okay, I got this text chat open here right now. I'll just do it.
Yep.
I might as well try to get the right address.
Yeah, that would help.
There's a period in Gmail, obviously. kbadley1@gmail.com. So I'll just push enter, or is it already there?
No. There it is.
Okay, and so I'm happy to send you any of these documents, and of course some of them are not self-explanatory, but you've all been professors and at one point were students, so you'll understand what I'm trying to get at with some of this stuff, but I'm happy to send you some of these things, and I give you a taste of what it's like, the chaos of my classes, I guess.
Well, maybe some here have experienced that.
Yeah, now I'm feeling guilty.
Well,
yeah, Rob, it was 1,000 years ago. Michelle, it was about 6. But anyway, hi.
Yeah, thanks for joining today, folks, and good day to all of you, and blessings.